Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and I read an incredibly interesting article by Kim T. Phillips, published in 1971, that I wanted to share with you. It's entitled Democrats of the Old School in the Era of Good Feelings. The reason I wanted to make this video is because many people get lost in the discussion of American politics prior to the formation of the Democrats and Republicans of today, so I wanted to talk about the origin of what would become the Democrats under Andrew Jackson, answering the questions of what did they believe in and how did they come to separate themselves from the political party of the time. The era of good feelings basically encompasses the presidency of James Monroe at the end of the War of 1812, and it refers to the point in American political history where really only one party existed, the Democratic Republicans, or simply Republicans. Not to be confused with the Republicans who would emerge in the 1850s, this is a different group. After the War of 1812, the Federalists ceased to exist. Their opposition to the war in the form of the Hartford Convention gave them the appearance of traitors to the country, especially after the victory at the Battle of New Orleans, and the Federalist Party members worked themselves into the Republican Party. So technically only one party existed, but calling it the era of good feelings is a misnomer. It was a time of chaotic political battles as the United States attempted to sort out its political problems. On the outside, America's political landscape seemed to be politically docile, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Daniel Walker Howe, in his book What Hath God Wrought, explained the political situation the United States found itself in. The concept of an era of good feelings that would transcend party conflict expressed some of the highest political ideals of the age. It was in keeping with the conventional wisdom of political philosophy, which viewed political parties as an evil. The political philosophers of classical times, including Greek Aristotle and the Roman Polybius, taught that institutions of balanced government could prevent the rise of political parties and the decline of republicanism that partisanship heralded. Early modern political theorists like Bolingbroke and the authors of Cato's Letters and the Federalist Papers likewise relied upon balanced institutions of government rather than a balance between two or more political parties to preserve liberty. The framers of the American Constitution, far from favoring parties, had hoped to prevent their emergence, although political parties had nevertheless developed in the young republic as a result of the bitter policy debates of the 1790s. No one approved of them in principle. Not only did Federalists move into the Republican Party, but Republicans already within the party began to take on Federalist ideas as a result of the War of 1812. The lack of infrastructure, industrialization, and equipment of troops made them realize that the United States was entirely unprepared for a war. Those Republicans, led by Henry Clay, pushed for the American system that was built on a platform of three major planks. First, internal improvements on the federal and state level to help not only in times of military need, but to improve the country's economy by building much-needed roads and dredging rivers so steamboats could gain access to more communities. 2. Protective tariffs to protect American businesses from foreign manufacturing. And 3. A national bank to regulate the money system in the United States. This all boils down to strengthening the federal government, an idea antithetical to the Jeffersonian ideals of the Democratic Republicans. This began to pull the party apart. Before the War of 1812, President Thomas Jefferson instituted an embargo on imported goods from Europe, specifically England and France, because of them seizing American ships and in general not recognizing United States sovereignty. This created an economic downturn in the United States, but because the country lacked European manufactured goods, some crafters/entrepreneurs and businessmen capitalized on this embargo by building factories. However, this divided the crafters. Small-time cobblers, millers, and other artists could not compete with the larger-scale producers. Because the Republicans began to side more and more with the richer and elite Americans, the small businesses and workers felt they had no one in American politics to look after their interests. Also, with a one-party system, the style of caucus used by the parties of the time was basically the incumbent politicians choosing the candidates to run, but without a majority of members, the former Federalists and some Republicans felt left out of the process because they could not nominate a candidate. An anti-caucus faction began to grow in the Republican Party. Clearly, a more democratic element of the Republican Party began to form, which exacerbated the political infighting. When I say democratic element, I do not mean an actual party, but that they possessed democratic ideals, giving voters more of a voice in politics. Andrew Jackson became synonymous with being anti-bank because he and others felt that they favored a privileged group of Americans. Their bad policies led to economic downturn, and they believed paper money was dangerous. During the era of good feelings, some Republicans began to fear banks. A great deal of that fear or hatred of banks came from the Panic of 1819 that resulted in bad banking practices as well as a bust from the War of 1812. The Republican Party began to switch to a fondness for banks, as seen in the American system developed by Henry Clay. This adoption of banks ostracized the element of the Republican Party who opposed central banking practices and paper money. When the country was founded, the only people who could vote were white male landholders of a certain amount of land or money. By the 1830s, most of the states had gotten rid of the property requirement, and no state required a religious prerequisite to vote. Although the relaxing of voting laws continued, it would still be later in the century before African American males got the right to vote and nearly 100 years before women got that right. Nevertheless, the country was moving in that direction. As stated earlier, the small d democratic elements of the Republican Party began to expand, and as more men achieved the right to vote through relaxation of voting laws, American systems became more democratic. During the election of 1824, when no candidate received a majority of electoral votes, the decision for president went to Congress. They elected John Quincy Adams, who came in second in the popular vote. The irate Jackson, along with Martin Van Buren, would then create the Democratic Party. Although Jackson became its head, Van Buren organized the party and formed it. However, they did not create it out of whole cloth. The Republicans were already divided over issues. Remember, it's called the era of good feelings, but that was not close to being true. It may have been one party, but factions existed within that party. Jackson and Van Buren took what historians and men of the time called the old school Democrats from the Republican Party. This new party catered to the Westerners and the non-elite. They believed the Democratic Republicans, by approving of a national bank and agreeing to more federalism, went against the founder of their party, Thomas Jefferson. By abandoning his ideas, they had taken on Federalist ideas and separated themselves entirely from what the party was founded upon. The new school would evolve into the Whigs, who opposed Jackson's presidency and be the opponents of the Democrats into the 1850s. They took their name from the British Whig Party, who opposed the monarchy. The American Whigs saw Andrew Jackson as imposing monarchical-like power over the United States, especially through his veto power, and thought the Whig name was the best fit for their stance. This has been a crash course of early American political history, but that is the early origins of the Democratic Party and a demonstration of how politically tumultuous the era of good feelings were.